The scar ran from Helena Owens' temple to her jawline, a wicked reminder of the fire that had taken everything from her 3 years ago. And now she stood on the auction block in Clifton, Arizona territory, in the sweltering August heat of 1883, wondering if death would have been kinder than this humiliation. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing her attributes like she was livestock. 22 years old, reasonably healthy despite the malnutrition that hollowed her cheeks, capable of domestic work. The crowd of men gathered in the dusty town square whispered among themselves, their eyes sliding away from her face whenever she tried to meet their gaze. Helena kept her chin up, refused to let them see her break, even as her heart shattered with each passing moment. "We'll start the bidding at $5, the auctioneer announced, mopping sweat from his brow with a stained handkerchief. Silence greeted his words. A tumbleweed rolled past the platform. Someone in the crowd coughed. $4 then, the auctioneer amended, his voice taking on a desperate edge. The territorial government had seized Helena after she could not pay the debts her dead father had left behind. And now they wanted her gone, wanted this uncomfortable business finished. More silence. Helena felt her cheeks burn, though whether from shame or the relentless sun, she could not tell. She had known she was not pretty, not anymore, but to stand here while grown men refused to bid even $4 for her labor made her wish the ground would swallow her whole. $1, the auctioneer finally said, his tone resigned. Surely someone will pay $1 for a hard-working woman. A man near the front, a rancher named Polk whom Helena recognized from town, raised his hand lazily. $1, he confirmed, and the satisfaction in his voice made her stomach turn. She had seen the way he treated his workers, had heard the stories whispered by the Mexican families who lived on the edge of town. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $1, going once, going twice, $10. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and clear, and every head turned to locate its source. A man pushed through the assembled townspeople, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty boots and worn denim, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. But it was his eyes that caught Helena's attention, brown and warm and fixed directly on her face without flinching. "Did you say $10? The auctioneer asked, his voice rising with surprise and perhaps a touch of relief. "Yes, sir," the cowboy said, climbing the steps to the platform. He moved with an easy grace, like a man comfortable in his own skin, and when he reached the top, he turned to face the crowd rather than Helena. "And I'll thank the rest of you to remember that this is a human being standing here, not a piece of furniture." Polk spat in the dust. "That's a mighty high price for damaged goods, stranger." The cowboy's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I did not hear anyone ask for your opinion, friend. The lady is worth every penny and more." Helena's breath caught in her throat. No one had called her a lady in 3 years. No one had called her anything but a burden or worse since the fire that had killed her parents and left her face marked forever. The auctioneer, sensing the tension, brought his gavel down quickly. "Sold to the gentleman for $10. Sir, if you'll just settle up with the clerk, the woman is yours. The woman is yours." The words echoed in Helena's mind as the cowboy descended the platform and disappeared into the building that served as Clifton's administrative office. She stood frozen, uncertain what to do, until a deputy sheriff gestured impatiently for her to step down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. She had been standing for over an hour in the heat, and shock was setting in now, making everything feel distant and unreal. The crowd dispersed, returning to their business, though she caught more than one curious glance thrown over shoulders as people walked away. Minutes stretched like taffy before the cowboy emerged from the office, a receipt in his hand. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket before approaching her. Up close, Helena could see the laugh lines around his eyes, the kindness in his expression. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28, old enough to have weathered some storms of his own. "I'm Jacob Jensen," he said, and extended his hand as if they were being introduced at a church social rather than standing in the aftermath of her public humiliation. "Most folks call me Jake." Helena stared at his hand for a long moment before slowly placing her own in it. Her fingers were rough from work, her nails broken and uneven, but he shook her hand gently, respectfully. "Helena Owens," she managed, her voice rusty from disuse. She had barely spoken to anyone in weeks. "Miss Owens, I have a proposition for you," Jake said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. He was not looking at her with desire or cruelty, but with what appeared to be genuine concern. "I need someone to help me with my ranch. It's not a big spread, just me and about 50 head of cattle, but I've been managing alone since my partner moved back east last spring, and it's too much for one person. I'll pay you fair wages, provide room and board, and you'll have your own space. If you want to leave at any time, you're free to do so. I'm not looking for a slave or a servant. I'm looking for a partner in running the place." Helena's throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you pay so much? Why are you being kind to me?" Jake's expression softened. "Because every person deserves kindness, Miss Owens. And because when I saw you standing up there with your head high, refusing to let them break you, I thought to myself, that's the kind of strength a man wants beside him when he's trying to build something lasting." "But my face," she said, her free hand rising instinctively to the scar. She had pulled it away before her fingers made contact, but Jake had seen the gesture. "What about it?" he asked, and he sounded genuinely confused. "It's ruined. I'm ruined." Jake shook his head slowly. "Miss Owens, I see a woman who survived something terrible and came out the other side still fighting. That scar tells me you're a survivor, and if you don't mind my saying so, you're beautiful." The word hung in the air between them. Beautiful. Helena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. No one had called her beautiful since before the fire, and even then, it had only been her mother's biased affection. This stranger, this cowboy who had paid 10 times what anyone else would offer, stood before her and said it like he meant it. "I don't understand," she said helplessly. "You don't have to understand right now," Jake replied. "You just have to decide if you're willing to give my offer a try. If you say no, I'll help you get settled somewhere else, set you up with enough money to make a fresh start. If you say yes, I promise to treat you with respect and fairness. Either way, you're not going back to whatever situation led you to that platform today." Helena thought of the cold charity house where she had been staying, of the women who ran it and their pursed lips of disapproval every time they looked at her. She thought of the debts that had crushed her after her parents died, of the territorial government seizing what little she had left. She thought of standing on that platform, listening to the silence that said she was worthless. Then she looked at Jake Jensen, at his honest eyes and his patient expression, and she thought that maybe, just maybe, she could risk trusting one more time. "I'll come with you," she said. "I'll try." The smile that broke across Jake's face was like sunrise, warm and full of promise. "That's all I ask, Miss Owens. That's all I ask." He led her to a wagon waiting at the edge of town, a sturdy vehicle pulled by 2 patient-looking horses. In the back, Helena could see supplies, sacks of grain and flour, tools and rope, and all the necessities of ranch life. Jake helped her up onto the bench seat with the same careful respect he had shown throughout their brief acquaintance. then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they pulled away from Clifton, heading north into the high desert country, Helena allowed herself one look back at the town that had witnessed her lowest moment. Then she turned her face forward, toward whatever future awaited her at Jacob Jensen's ranch. They rode in silence for the first hour, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves on the hard, packed dirt road. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and sage brush, with mountains rising in the distance like the bones of the earth pushing through skin. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, but Helena found she did not mind. There was something cleansing about the heat, about the vast emptiness of the land. "It's about another hour to the ranch," Jake said eventually, breaking the comfortable quiet. "It's not much, but it's honest land. Good water from a spring, decent grazing. I've been building it up slowly, saving to buy more cattle, maybe hire some seasonal hands for roundup." "How long have you had it?" Helena asked, surprising herself with the question. She had not expected to be curious, to want to know more about this man. 3 years now. "My partner, Thomas, and I bought it together after we'd been cowboying for other people long enough to save up. He met a woman back in Boston through letters, decided he wanted to go east and try city life." Jake's mouth quirked in a wry smile. "Can't say I understand it myself, but Thomas was always the one with romantic notions." "And you?" The question slipped out before Helena could stop it. "No romantic notions for you." Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "I suppose I always figured if the right person came along, I'd know. Never saw much point in chasing after something that's supposed to find you in its own time." He glanced at her, then quickly away. "What about you, Miss Owens? Any family waiting for you somewhere?" The familiar ache settled in Helena's chest. "No. My parents died in the fire that gave me the scar. I have an aunt back in Ohio, but we haven't spoken since she told me she could not afford to take in a disfigured niece who would shame the family." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She had thought she had moved past that particular hurt. "I'm sorry," Jake said, and the simple sincerity of it loosened something tight inside her. "For what it's worth, your aunt's loss is my gain. I have a feeling you're going to be the best thing that's happened to the ranch in a long while." Helena did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. Just watched the land roll past and tried to imagine what it would be like to have a place to call home again. The ranch, when they finally reached it, was indeed modest. A small house built of adobe and wood, a barn that looked like it had seen better days, a corral with a few horses watching their approach with mild interest. But there was something appealing about it too, something honest and unpretentious. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, and she could hear the splash of water falling into a trough. Jake pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Helena descend. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her, strong and sure, and she was acutely aware of his nearness. The smell of sun-warmed cotton and leather, and something indefinably masculine. "Careful," he said softly, and waited until she had her balance before releasing her. "Let me show you around, then we can get you settled in." The house was simple but clean, which surprised her. She had expected the typical bachelor chaos, but Jake clearly took pride in his space. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a sturdy table with 2 chairs. A door on the left led to what Jake explained was his bedroom, while a door on the right opened onto a smaller room with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "This was Thomas's room," Jake said, standing in the doorway while Helena looked around. "I've kept it ready, changed the bedding regularly just in case he ever wanted to visit. But it's yours now for as long as you want it. There's a lock on the door on the inside. I want you to feel safe here." Helena turned to look at this man who kept surprising her with his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "You're welcome." Jake shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "I imagine you must be hungry." "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and cornbread if you'd like to rest while I get supper going." "I can cook," Helena said quickly. "If you'll show me where things are, I'd like to help. I'm not used to sitting idle." Something that might have been relief crossed Jake's face. "I was hoping you'd say that. Thomas used to say my cornbread could be used for building material." They worked together in the kitchen, an awkward dance at first as they learned each other's rhythms, where the other would reach, how much space they each needed. But gradually, they found a harmony. Jake provided information, where he kept the flour and salt, where the good skillet hung. Helena assessed what was available and mentally planned not just tonight's meal, but what she might cook in the days to come. As she worked, she caught Jake watching her from the corner of her eye. But when she turned her head, expecting to see disgust or pity, she found only interest and something that might have been admiration. It made her hands tremble slightly as she rolled out dough. "I should warn you," Jake said, pumping water into a pot for coffee. "I'm up before dawn most days. The cattle don't much care about sleeping in, but you're welcome to rise whenever suits you. I don't expect you to keep my hours." "I've always been an early riser," Helena replied, shaping the dough into rounds. "My father used to say I'd make a good rooster." The memory came with less pain than usual, and she wondered if it was the distraction of her new surroundings, or simply the passage of time finally doing its work. They ate as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible, too beautiful to be real. Jake asked her questions, gentle inquiries about her life before, and Helena found herself answering with more honesty than she had shown anyone in years. She told him about growing up in Clifton, about her father's general store and her mother's garden, about the fire that had started in the middle of the night from a knocked-over lantern and spread too quickly for them to escape. She told him about waking up in the doctor's house, her face bandaged, being told her parents had not made it out. "I tried to keep the store going," she said, staring at her plate, "but I didn't know enough about my father's business dealings. He owed money to people I'd never heard of, and they all came calling at once. The territorial government seized everything to pay the debts, and even then it wasn't enough. They were going to put me in jail until someone suggested the auction instead." Jake's jaw tightened. "That's not justice." "No," Helena agreed, "but it's the law. Sometimes the law is wrong." He said it with such conviction that she looked up, met his eyes. "You deserved better than that, Miss Owens. You deserved people who would help you, not punish you for circumstances beyond your control." "Well," she said softly, "I suppose I found someone who helped me after all." The look that passed between them then was charged with something Helena could not quite name, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. Jake broke eye contact first, clearing his throat and standing to collect the dishes. "I'll wash up," he said. "You've done enough for today." "We can do it together," Helena countered, rising as well. "Faster that way." So they stood side by side at the basin, Jake washing while Helena dried, and the simple domesticity of it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. This, she thought, this was what a home felt like. Not the house itself, but the companionship, the partnership, the sense of working together toward a common goal. When the dishes were done and put away, Jake showed her where the washroom was, a small addition on the back of the house with a tin tub and a pump. He hauled water and heated it for her without being asked, then left her alone to wash away the grime and shame of the auction. Helena sank into the warm water and finally let herself cry. Great shuddering sobs that shook her whole body, releasing all the fear and humiliation and grief she had been holding back for so long. She cried for her parents, for the life she had lost, for the girl she had been before the fire marked her. And then, when the tears finally slowed, she cried a little bit more for the unexpected kindness of a cowboy who had seen past her scars to something worth saving. When she emerged, clean and wrung out but somehow lighter, she found a nightgown laid out on her bed, worn soft from washing but clean and decent. She had no idea where Jake had gotten it, but she put it on gratefully and slipped between the sheets of the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jake moving around in his own room, the creak of floorboards and the rustle of fabric. Then silence settled over the house, broken only by the distant sound of cattle lowing and the wind sighing through the eaves. Helena lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what had happened to her life in the space of a single day. This morning, she had been facing a future of servitude at best, abuse at worst. Now she lay in a clean bed in a safe place with a man who had called her beautiful and asked for nothing but honest work in return. It seemed too good to be true, and the cynical part of her, the part that had been hardened by loss and betrayal, waited for the other shoe to drop. But sleep claimed her before she could worry too much, and her dreams were surprisingly peaceful. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee. Pale light filtered through her window, the sun not yet fully risen. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory flooded back, and she sat up quickly, reaching for the simple dress that hung on a peg by the door. Another gift from Jake, she assumed, though how he had women's clothing on hand was a mystery she would have to solve later. When she emerged from her room, she found Jake at the stove, coaxing a fire to life under a pot of oatmeal. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and smiled, a genuine expression of pleasure at seeing her. "Morning," he said. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No," Helena replied, moving to help him. "I told you, I'm an early riser." "What needs doing?" Over breakfast, Jake outlined the day's work. The cattle needed checking. One of the fence lines had come down in a storm last week and needed mending. There was water to be hauled and animals to be fed. Helena listened, committing it all to memory, and when he asked what she felt comfortable taking on, she surprised them both by saying she would come with him to check the cattle. "You ride?" Jake asked, eyebrows raised. "I used to," Helena said. "It's been a few years, but I imagine it's like anything else. You don't really forget." Jake's smile widened. "Then let's get you mounted up." The horse he saddled for her was a gentle mare named Daisy, patient and steady. Helena's muscles remembered what her mind had half forgotten, and soon she was seated securely, reins in hand. Jake swung up onto his own horse, a rangy gelding called Buck, and led the way out into the range. The morning was cool, the air still holding a hint of the night's chill, and Helena breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the clean desert air. They rode in companionable silence, crossing land that rolled and dipped, dotted with sage and mesquite. The cattle were scattered across several acres, peacefully grazing, and Jake moved among them with an experienced eye, checking for injuries or illness. Helena watched him work, admiring the easy competence with which he handled the animals, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to them. He clearly loved this life, this land, and she found herself wanting to prove worthy of a place in it. "You're a natural," Jake said when they paused to water the horses at a stream. "I can tell you've spent time around animals." "My father kept a few horses for deliveries," Helena explained. "I used to ride with him sometimes when I was younger, before he decided I was old enough to mind the store. Did you like it? Working in the store? Helena considered the question. I liked helping people find what they needed. I liked keeping the books balanced, seeing everything in its place. But I think I like this better. She gestured to the landscape around them, the vast openness of it, the sense of space and possibility. In town, she had always felt confined, hemmed in by buildings and expectations. Out here, she could breathe. Jake's expression was thoughtful. I felt the same way when I left my father's farm in Kansas. He wanted me to take over, keep working the same plot of land his father had worked, but I needed something different, something that was mine. Do you regret it? Not for a moment. He said it with such certainty that Helena believed him. This land, this life, it's hard sometimes, lonely sometimes, but it's honest and it's mine. Well, he amended with a glance at her, ours if you decide to stay. The casual way he said it, the assumption that she might become a permanent part of this life, sent a flutter through Helena's chest. She was not ready to examine that feeling too closely, so she changed the subject, asking about the cattle, their breeding, when Jake planned to take them to market. They rode back to the ranch house around midday, both hungry and ready for a break from the sun. Helena prepared a simple meal of bread and cheese while Jake tended to the horses, and they ate on the porch, watching the heat shimmer over the land. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Helena rose with the sun, helped Jake with the morning chores, then took on the domestic tasks that kept the household running. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and tended the small vegetable garden she discovered behind the house, long neglected but not beyond saving. In the afternoons, she often rode out with Jake, learning the boundaries of the ranch, the best grazing areas, the places where water could be found. Jake was true to his word, treating her with unfailing respect and kindness. He never entered her room without knocking, never made demands, never looked at her with anything but appreciation for her work and, increasingly, what seemed like genuine affection. For her part, Helena found herself drawn to him in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the strength in his hands when he lifted a saddle or mended a fence. She noticed the consideration behind his every action, the way he always made sure she had enough water during the hot afternoons, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words truly mattered. 2 weeks into her stay, they were working together to repair the fence line when a snake spooked Jake's horse. The gelding reared and Jake went down hard, hitting his head on a fence post. Helena was off Daisy in an instant, running to his side, fear making her heart race. Jake? She fell to her knees beside him, her hands fluttering over him, unsure where to touch. Jake, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused for a moment before settling on her face. Helena, he murmured, and the sound of her given name on his lips without the formal Miss Owens sent heat through her veins. You hit your head, she said, gently probing the lump already forming near his temple. Can you sit up? With her help, he managed to get upright, though he swayed slightly. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, and Helena pulled her kerchief from her pocket, pressing it gently to the wound. I'm all right, Jake said, but his voice was shaky. Just got the wind knocked out of me. You need to see a doctor, Helena insisted. The nearest doctor is in Clifton, 3 hours away. Jake reached up to take the kerchief from her, and his fingers brushed hers, sending a jolt of awareness through both of them. I've had worse than this. Just help me back to the house, and I'll be fine. Helena wanted to argue, but she could see the stubborn set of his jaw and knew it would be pointless. Instead, she helped him to his feet, steadied him when he wobbled, and got him mounted on Buck with Daisy's reins tied to her saddle. She led both horses back to the ranch at a careful walk, watching Jake anxiously the whole way. At the house, she settled him in his bed, despite his protests that he could manage on his own. She cleaned the cut on his head, relieved to find it was not as deep as she had feared, and wrapped it with clean cloth. Jake submitted to her ministrations with surprising docility, his eyes tracking her movements as she worked. "You're good at this," he said softly. "Taking care of people." "My mother taught me," Helena replied, smoothing the bandage into place. "She always said a woman should know how to treat common injuries. You never know when you'll need to." Smart woman, she was. Helena sat back on her heels, studying Jake's face. The color was returning to his cheeks, his eyes more focused now. "How do you feel?" "Like I got thrown by my own horse," Jake said with a rueful smile. "Which is embarrassing since I've been riding since I was old enough to sit a saddle." "It could have happened to anyone," Helena said firmly. "That snake came out of nowhere." Jake reached up and caught her hand, the gesture so sudden and unexpected that she froze. His fingers were warm around hers, calloused from hard work but gentle. "Thank you," he said, his brown eyes locked on hers, "for taking care of me." Helena's mouth went dry. She was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, of the intimacy of being in his bedroom, of the way he was looking at her like she was something precious. "You're welcome," she whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words, unacknowledged feelings. Then Jake's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. "Helena," he began, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." She waited, barely breathing. "These past 2 weeks, having you here, they've been the best weeks I can remember. And it's not just because you're a good cook or a hard worker, though you're both of those things. It's because I enjoy your company. I like talking to you, riding with you, just being near you. I find myself looking forward to meals because I know we'll sit together, and I'm disappointed when the day ends because it means less time in your presence." Helena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "Jake, wait, let me finish," he said, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "I know this is fast. I know I promised you could leave any time, and that offer still stands. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as my employee and started thinking of you as someone I could build a life with. Someone I want to build a life with." The words hung between them, beautiful and terrifying. Helena thought of all the reasons she should pull away, protect herself. She was scarred, damaged, carrying grief and trauma that would never fully heal. What could she possibly offer a man like Jake, who deserved someone whole and unspoiled? But when she looked into his eyes, she saw none of the pity or disgust she had learned to expect. She saw only warmth and hope and something that looked very much like love. "I think about you too," she said, her voice trembling. "All the time. When I'm working in the garden, I imagine you coming around the corner of the house. When I'm cooking, I think about which dishes you like best. And at night, lying in my bed, I think about you on the other side of the wall and wish." She trailed off, blushing. "Wish what?" Jake asked softly. "That there wasn't a wall between us," she admitted. Jake's breath caught. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached up and cupped her scarred cheek in his palm. His thumb traced the line of the scar, following it from temple to jaw, and his touch was reverent, tender. "You're so beautiful," he said, and she could hear the truth of it in his voice. "Every part of you." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "How can you say that? How can you look at me and see anything but—" "I see a survivor," Jake interrupted. "I see strength and courage and grace. I see a woman who faced the worst the world could throw at her and came out the other side with kindness still intact. I see someone I could love for the rest of my life, if she'd let me." "Jake," she breathed. And then there were no more words, because he was pulling her closer and she was going willingly, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Helena had been kissed before, clumsy stolen kisses from boys in town before the fire, but nothing had prepared her for this. For the way Jake's mouth moved against hers, patient and thorough, asking rather than demanding. For the way his hand cupped the back of her head, fingers threading through her hair. For the warmth that flooded through her, settling low in her belly and making her feel things she had never expected to feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably mention," he said, a smile in his voice, "that I might have a concussion and you shouldn't necessarily trust anything I say right now." Helena laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her, pure and joyful. "Then I'll ask you again tomorrow when your head is clearer." "Ask me every day for the rest of our lives," Jake said, pulling back to look at her. "The answer will always be the same." She kissed him again, a quick press of lips, then stood reluctantly. "You need to rest. I'll check on you in a couple of hours." "Helena," Jake called as she reached the door. She turned back, and the look on his face made her knees weak. "I meant every word." "I know," she said softly. "So did I." She spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, going through the motions of her chores while her mind replayed the scene in Jake's bedroom over and over. Her lips still tingled from his kiss. Her skin still felt warm where he had touched her. She kept catching herself smiling for no reason, and the fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years seemed to have loosened its grip. She checked on Jake regularly, and each time found him improving. By evening, he insisted on getting up for dinner, and they ate together at the table, their knees bumping beneath it, their eyes meeting and sliding away in a dance of new awareness and old comfort. After the dishes were done, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The night was cool, a relief after the heat of the day, and when Helena shivered, Jake draped a blanket around her shoulders. His arm stayed there across her back, and she leaned into his warmth without thinking. "Tell me about your dreams," Jake said into the comfortable silence. "What did you want to do with your life before the fire?" Helena considered the question. "I wanted to travel," she said finally. "I wanted to see the ocean, visit San Francisco, maybe even go back east to the big cities. I wanted to read all the books I could get my hands on and learn everything there was to know." She smiled ruefully. "Small dreams, maybe, but they were mine." "They're not small," Jake said firmly, "and they're not gone either. We could travel when the ranch is more established. Take the train to San Francisco, see the Pacific. I've never seen it either." "We," Helena repeated, her heart skipping. "We," Jake confirmed. "If you want. If you stay." Helena turned to look at him, at this man who kept offering her the world with such casual certainty. "I don't think I could leave now if I wanted to," she said honestly. "This place, it feels like home. You feel like home." Jake's smile was brilliant even in the darkness. He leaned in and kissed her again, slow and deep, and Helena lost herself in the sensation, in the feeling of being wanted and cherished and safe. They sat together until the night grew too cold to stay outside. Then Jake walked her to her bedroom door. He kissed her goodnight, a lingering press of lips that promised more to come, and waited until she had closed and locked her door before retreating to his own room. Helena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and let herself imagine a future she had never dared to hope for. A future with Jake, building the ranch together, maybe children someday, a real family. It seemed impossibly bright, impossibly good, but for the first time in years, she let herself believe it might actually happen. The next morning, Jake was fully recovered, and they fell back into their routine with one significant difference. Now, They reached for each other freely, small touches throughout the day that spoke of growing affection. Jake's hand on the small of Helena's back as they worked in the kitchen. Helena's fingers brushing Jake's shoulder as she passed him. Stolen kisses in the barn, in the garden, on the porch under the stars. A month passed, then two. The ranch thrived under their joint care. Helena's garden produced vegetables that they ate fresh and preserved for winter. Jake brought in a good price for some of the cattle, money he said they would put toward building up the herd. They worked side by side in easy partnership, and at night they sat together and talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies through increasingly passionate kisses. But Jake never pushed for more, never suggested that Helena move into his room or give herself to him before marriage. She appreciated his restraint even as she grew frustrated with it, especially on the nights when their kisses left her aching and breathless. Finally, on a night in late October when the air had turned crisp and the stars seemed close enough to touch, Helena broke the silence. "Jake, why haven't you asked me to marry you?" They were sitting on the porch, as had become their habit, wrapped in a blanket together. Jake stiffened slightly at her question, and for a moment she feared she had overstepped. Then he sighed and pulled her closer. "Because I'm scared," he admitted. "Because you're still free to leave whenever you want, and if you're my wife, that choice becomes more complicated. I don't want you to feel trapped." Helena pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face in the moonlight. "Jake Jensen, do I seem like a woman who does anything she doesn't want to do?" A smile tugged at his lips. "No, madam." "Then believe me when I say that if you ask me to marry you right now, I would say yes. I would say yes tomorrow, next week, next year. I would say yes every time you asked for the rest of our lives. Because I love you, you stubborn man, and I want to be your wife." Jake's eyes widened. "You love me? Did you think I was kissing you just to pass the time?" Helena asked, laughing. "Yes, I love you. I've loved you since you stood on that auction platform and called me beautiful. I've loved you every day since, more and more, until I think I might burst from it." "Helena Owens," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children if we're blessed with them? Will you build a life with me here on this land for as long as we both shall live?" "Yes," Helena said and kissed him. "Yes, yes, yes." Jake laughed against her mouth, then stood and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and breathless. When he set her down, he kept his arms around her, and she could feel the beating of his heart against her chest. "I'll buy you a ring when we go to town," he promised. "Something beautiful, worthy of you." "I don't need a ring," Helena said. "I just need you." "You'll have both," Jake said firmly. "You'll have everything I can give you for the rest of our lives." They were married 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony in Clifton with the town preacher officiating. Helena wore a new dress, pale blue calico that Jake had helped her pick out, and she had pinned her hair up with combs Jake had surprised her with the night before. They were simple silver combs, nothing fancy, but the care with which he had chosen them made them more precious than jewels. A few townspeople attended, more out of curiosity than goodwill, but Helena found she did not care. Let them stare at her scar, let them whisper about the scarred woman who had snagged a handsome cowboy. She knew the truth. She knew that Jake loved her, scars and all, and that was all that mattered. After the ceremony, they had a small meal at the hotel, just the two of them, and then Jake drove her back to the ranch in the wagon, now legally and officially her home. Helena was nervous as they approached the house. She knew what came next, had a vague idea of what happened between a husband and wife on their wedding night, but the reality of it made her stomach flutter with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Jake seemed to sense her nervousness. Instead of leading her directly to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom, he took her out to the porch and they sat together under the stars, just as they had done so many nights before. "Are you afraid?" he asked gently, his arm around her shoulders. "A little," Helena admitted. "Not of you. Just of the unknown." "We don't have to do anything tonight," Jake said. "We have the rest of our lives. There's no rush." Helena turned to look at him, at this man who had been patient and kind and respectful from the moment they met. "I want to," she said softly. "I want to be your wife in every way. I'm just nervous." Jake cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "So am I," he confessed. "I want to make this good for you. I want to show you how much I love you. But I've never been with anyone I loved before, and the thought of possibly hurting you or disappointing you terrifies me." The vulnerability in his voice touched Helena deeply. She kissed him, pouring all her love and trust into the contact. "We'll figure it out together," she said. "Just like we've figured out everything else." Jake stood and held out his hand. Helena took it, and he led her inside to their bedroom. He had lit candles earlier, and the room glowed softly in the flickering light. Someone, probably Jake, had scattered wildflowers on the bed, and the sight made Helena's throat tighten with emotion. They undressed each other slowly, with trembling hands and whispered words of reassurance. Helena tried not to be self-conscious about her body, about the scars that marked not just her face but her shoulder and arm from the fire. But when Jake's eyes swept over her, there was only reverence in his gaze. "Beautiful," he murmured, and kissed the scar on her shoulder, then the one on her arm, then finally the one on her face. "Every part of you." Helena explored him in turn, marveling at the strength in his body, the scars he carried from his own years of hard work and harder living. They learned each other slowly, gently, and when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Helena's eyes. There was some pain, as she had been warned there would be, but Jake was patient and careful, and the discomfort soon gave way to something else, something warm and building and all-consuming. They moved together, finding a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, and when Helena finally shattered in Jake's arms, crying out his name, she felt more whole than she had since before the fire. Afterward, they lay tangled together, hearts still racing, skin damp with sweat. Jake pressed kisses to her temple, her cheek, her lips, murmuring words of love and praise. "I love you," he said. "My wife, my Helena." "I love you too," she whispered back. "My husband, my Jake." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Helena's last conscious thought was that she had never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely loved. The winter passed in a haze of contentment. They worked together during the day and came together every night, learning each other's bodies as thoroughly as they had learned each other's minds. The ranch thrived despite the cold, the cattle healthy and the water still flowing from the spring. In the spring, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited until she was sure before telling Jake. She chose a morning when they were working together in the barn, mucking out stalls, and she simply blurted it out between one shovel of hay and the next. "I'm going to have a baby." Jake froze, his shovel halfway to the wheelbarrow. He turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "You're certain?" Helena nodded, suddenly nervous. They had not discussed children beyond that first proposal, had not talked about whether Jake wanted them or was ready for them. "Are you happy?" she asked. Jake dropped the shovel and crossed to her in 3 long strides, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "Happy? Helena, I'm overjoyed. We're going to have a baby." He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "When? How do you feel? Should you be working? You need to sit down." Helena laughed at his sudden fussing. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. The baby should come in late fall, and I feel fine, just a little tired sometimes." Jake's expression turned serious. "You'll tell me if you need to rest more, if anything hurts or feels wrong." "I promise," Helena said, covering his hands with hers. "I'll take care of myself and our baby." True to her word, Helena continued to work throughout her pregnancy, though Jake insisted on taking over the heavier tasks. As her belly grew, she focused more on the domestic work, cooking and preserving food for the winter, sewing tiny clothes for the baby that was coming. Jake was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if the baby was moving. Helena found his concern endearing even when it bordered on excessive. In late October, almost exactly a year after their engagement, Helena went into labor. Jake rode for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen who lived on a neighboring ranch, and paced anxiously while Helena labored. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Helena wondered if she would survive it. But Mrs. Chen was skilled and calm, and finally, after hours of pain and effort, Helena heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It's a boy, Mrs. Chen announced, placing the squalling infant on Helena's chest. "A strong, healthy boy." Helena looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face and his tiny fists waving in the air, and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. When Jake entered the room, his face pale and anxious, she smiled up at him through her tears. "Come meet your son," she said. Jake approached slowly, reverently, and when he looked down at the baby in Helena's arms, his eyes filled with tears. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're both perfect." They named him Joshua after Jake's grandfather, and he was indeed perfect. He had Helena's eyes and Jake's dark hair, and from the beginning he was a good baby, crying only when hungry or tired. The first months were exhausting, adjusting to life with an infant, but Jake and Helena faced it as they faced everything, together. Jake helped with the night feedings, walking the floor with Joshua when he was fussy, changing diapers and bathing him with a gentleness that made Helena's heart swell. As Joshua grew, he became the center of their world. They celebrated his first smile, his first tooth, his first word, which was, to Jake's delight, a mangled version of Dada. The ranch continued to prosper, and they hired seasonal workers for Roundup, freeing up more of Jake's time to spend with his family. When Joshua was 2, Helena became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Hannah. She was a tiny, delicate baby with wispy blonde hair and Helena's smile, and Joshua was immediately smitten with his baby sister. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work and love. They added onto the house, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They expanded the herd, bought more land, hired a few permanent hands to help with the work. Jake taught Joshua to ride, and Helena taught Hannah to read, and together they built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. Sometimes, lying in bed at night with Jake's arm around her, and the sound of their children breathing softly in the next room, Helena thought back to that day on the auction platform. She thought about the woman she had been then, broken and hopeless, believing herself worthless because of a scar. She thought about Jake, looking past the scar to the person beneath, paying 10 times what anyone else would offer and calling her beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" Jake murmured, pulling her closer. "About how lucky I am," Helena said. "About how close I came to missing all of this." Jake pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm the lucky one. You saved me, Helena. I didn't know how lonely I was until you came and filled my life with light." Helena turned in his arms to face him. Even after all these years, he still took her breath away. "We saved each other," she said. "Yes," Jake agreed and kissed her. We did. They made love quietly, mindful of the children sleeping nearby, and afterward lay tangled together, hearts beating in sync. The years continued to unfold. Joshua grew into a strong, kind young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Hannah became a bright, curious girl with a talent for music and a gift for making friends. Jake and Helena grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Each shared joy and weathered storm. When Joshua was 20 and Hannah was 18, Jake and Helena took that trip to San Francisco they had dreamed about all those years ago. They left the ranch in Joshua's capable hands and boarded the train like wide-eyed children, holding hands and laughing at their own excitement. They stood on the beach and watched the Pacific Ocean roll in, waves crashing against the shore with relentless power. They explored the city, saw performances at the Opera House, ate food from a dozen different countries. And every night, they returned to their hotel room and made love like newlyweds, grateful for every moment they had together. "Thank you," Helena said one night as they lay in bed, the sound of the city drifting up from the streets below. "For what?" Jake asked. "For seeing me," Helena said simply. "For looking past what everyone else saw and finding something worth loving." Jake propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her. The moonlight coming through the window illuminated her face, highlighting the scar that had faded over the years but never disappeared. He traced it with one finger, just as he had done countless times before. "I didn't have to look past anything," he said seriously. "The scar is part of you, part of your story, part of what makes you who you are. I loved all of you from the beginning, Helena. I still do. I always will." Helena's eyes filled with tears, happy tears, and she pulled him down for a kiss. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for paying $10 for a damaged woman everyone else saw as worthless." "Best $10 I ever spent," Jake said with a grin. "Though I would have paid 100, 1,000, everything I had." "Flatterer," Helena teased, but her heart was full. They returned to the ranch 2 weeks later to find everything running smoothly. Joshua had managed perfectly in their absence, and Hannah had kept detailed notes of everything that had happened, presenting them with a report that made Jake laugh and Helena tear up with pride. Life continued its steady rhythm. Joshua married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Jake and Helena their first grandchild, a boy they named Jacob after his grandfather. Hannah married a schoolteacher from Clifton, and together they opened a school on the outskirts of town, educating the children of miners and ranchers alike. Jake and Helena slowed down as they aged, passing more and more of the ranch work to Joshua and his growing family. But every morning they still rose together and had coffee on the porch, watching the sun come up over the land they had built their life on. And every night they still fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for another day together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling the expanded ranch house to bursting. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army, and Jake and Helena sat in places of honor, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, basking in the love of the family they had created. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Jake pulled Helena to her feet and led her outside to the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. "Dance with me," he said, and even though there was no music, they swayed together under the stars, holding each other close. 30 years, Helena murmured. "It feels like yesterday and forever all at once." "Best 30 years of my life," Jake said. "Though I'm looking forward to the next 32, Helena laughed. "We'd both be over 80, Jake. Then we'll be over 80 together," he said simply. Still dancing under the stars, still in love, still grateful for every moment. Helena laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she admitted. "That day in Clifton, standing on that platform, I thought my life was over. I thought I was worthless because of this scar." Jake stopped dancing and cupped her face in his hands, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. "You were never worthless. You were always beautiful, always valuable, always deserving of love and respect. I just had the good sense to see it." "And I had the good sense to trust you," Helena said. "To take a chance on a cowboy who paid too much at an auction and called me beautiful." "I didn't pay too much," Jake protested. "If anything, $10 was a bargain for a lifetime with the woman I love." Helena kissed him, deep and long and full of all the love that had grown between them over 30 years. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Come to bed, husband," Helena said. "Let's not waste a moment of the time we have left." "Every moment with you is time well spent, wife," Jake replied. And hand in hand, they walked back into the house they had built together, ready to face whatever the future held as long as they faced it together. The years that followed were gentle ones. Jake and Helena watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated more weddings, welcomed more great-grandchildren into the family. The ranch passed fully into Joshua's hands, but Jake and Helena still lived there. In a smaller house Joshua had built for them closer to the main house, but far enough away to give everyone privacy. They spent their days reading, talking, walking slowly around the land they loved. They traveled occasionally, visiting Hannah in Clifton or taking the train to see distant family. But mostly, they were content to be together, enjoying the quiet companionship of a love that had weathered decades and only grown stronger. Jake's health began to fail when he was 75. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for too many years. Helena nursed him patiently, just as he had cared for her through illnesses and injuries over the years. They both knew his time was growing short, but they faced it with the same courage and partnership they had brought to every challenge in their life together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jake took Helena's hand. "I'm not afraid," he said quietly, "of what's coming. I've had a good life, a full life because of you." Helena's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "Not yet. You gave me a good life too," she said. "You saved me, Jake, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Jake said, echoing the words she had spoken so many years ago. "That's what love does, I think. It saves us from ourselves, from our fears, from our loneliness. It makes us whole." They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. When the stars began to come out, Helena helped Jake to bed, just as she had done every night for more than 40 years. He died peacefully in his sleep 3 nights later, Helena's hand in his, her head resting on his chest so she could hear his heartbeat until it finally, gently stopped. The grief was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to imagine going on. But Helena had her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a whole family that had sprung from the love she and Jake had shared. They surrounded her with comfort and care, and slowly, the grief eased into something more manageable. Helena lived for another 5 years after Jake's death. She spent them surrounded by family, telling stories about her life with Jake, passing on the lessons they had learned together. She taught her great-grandchildren to be kind, to look past surfaces to the person beneath, to value character over appearance. And every evening, no matter the weather, she sat on the porch of the small house she had shared with Jake and looked at the stars, remembering a cowboy who had seen past her scars to the woman beneath, who had paid $10 when no one else would pay one, who had called her beautiful and meant it with his whole heart. When Helena died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Jake had created, her last thought was of that first kiss, that moment on the porch when Jake had told her he could love her for the rest of his life if she would let him. She had let him, and it had been the best decision of her life. They buried her next to Jake on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Arizona sky they had both loved so much. And if you visited that spot on a quiet evening, when the wind was just right, you might have heard the echo of laughter, the whisper of old love stories told under the stars, the enduring legacy of a scarred woman and the cowboy who had looked at her and seen only beauty.